I'm Femi Oke.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
Daryl Davis is a black musician who spent 30 years infiltrating a white supremacist organization. He'll tell us about it on today's show. Daryl, come over and join us. Welcome to the stream. While you get settled, I'm going to tell our audience a little bit more about you. Now, Daryl has an unusual approach to tackling racism. He's on a lifelong mission to befriend members of the Ku Klux Klan. And along the way, he says a couple of hundred of them have left the Klan after making friends with him. Joining Daryl in our studio, Scott Shepard, a former leader of the Klan who turned his back on the organization, partly due to his friendship with Daryl, who he now calls a brother. Gentlemen, brothers, welcome. Just from that introduction alone, people who don't know you, don't know your story, are going to be amazed by it. I want to show them a little clip from a film called Accidental Courtesy. It's a clip about, a documentary about your story and your mission to befriend members of the Ku Klux Klan. So I'm going to show a little clip with an imperial wizard called Frank. Have a look at this. It shows you what Daryl does.
Hey, Frank, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
How are you?
All right, great. Have a seat.
All right.
I've known Frank for a little over 3 years now. I consider Frank to be my friend.
I consider Daryl to be my friend as well. We met through someone was wanting to do an interview, so I think we talked for a few months even before the interview.
Yeah, we did.
Had a lot of good conversations with each other. Felt like, hey, this is somebody I can relate to.
Daryl, what happened to you as a young man, as a child, that made you want to reach out to not just people from another group, but extremists from another group, from a different community?
Well, first of all, we all are human beings, but I had an upbringing unlike most of my American peers. My parents were U.S. Foreign Service, so at an early age, back in the 1960s, we were assigned to various countries abroad. You're there for 2 years, come back home for a few months, in another country for 2 years, etc. So while I was overseas, I attended international schools. My classes were filled with other kids from Nigeria, Italy, France, Japan, Germany. Anybody who had an embassy there, all of their kids, we all went to the same school. That's how I grew up. That's all I knew. But when I would come home back here to my own country, I would either be in all black schools or black and white schools, depending upon whether I was going to the still segregated or the newly integrated school. And there was not the amount of diversity in the classroom here that I had overseas. So overseas, I was literally living 12 to 15 years into the future because that scenario had yet to come here. So I was already prepared for diversity and multiculturalism. And so it was a culture shock for me in my own country, with people not accepting somebody for something as ridiculous as their religious belief or the color of their skin.
There is a difference, though, between that culture shock and then taking that extra step and saying, I want to hang out with KKK.
No, not really, because there are a lot of people who dress like this, who dress like you, who have that same belief as the people who wear the robes and the hoods. You just don't know it. You may see them every day in their regular clothes or on the job, but it's not so much the dress. What's important is that we get to know the person's heart and their mind. So it didn't bother me because I was used to all kinds of different robes. Some people are more expressive about their views than others. Some people just keep it hidden. But it did not faze me. I wanted to know about those views and say, hey, look, I've been around people from all over the world. And at the end of the day, guess what I found out? They're all human.
Daryl, for those of our viewers who may not know, in addition to this work, you're also a pretty prominent blues musician, and you started the show with a little boogie woogie. So I want to bring in this tweet here. This is a black populist, and she says, Daryl Davis is a black musician known for deprogramming white supremacists, and it's a great example of why cultural appropriation matters. I'm struck by how frequently white supremacy is rooted in ignorance about the contributions of non-whites to, well, everything. So this is a tweet that's been circulated online. Explain for us what the link is between what you were doing at the top of the show and the work that you do in your off time.
Okay, well, one of the things that was an impetus for this, that style of music that I was playing, that is a black style of music. We created the first forms of American music, the blues, rock and roll, gospel, and even Hank Williams Sr., the father of country music, learned to play guitar from a black street blues guitar player in Montgomery, Alabama. So at one point, I was playing in a country band back in the 80s, and I was in an all-white place. The band was all white. I was just the only black person in the place. And on the break, a gentleman came over to me and expressed how much he enjoyed the music I was playing. It was that same style I opened up with. And then he made the remark that this was the first time he'd ever heard a black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis, which speaks to what the tweet says. And I had to educate him on the origin of Jerry Lee Lewis's music. The guy did not believe me. And I told him, Jerry Lee Lewis is a very good friend of mine. He's told me himself where he learned how to play. The guy didn't buy it, but he wanted to buy me a drink. And so I don't drink alcohol, but he got me a cranberry juice, and he takes his glass, he clinks my glass and cheers me. And then he makes another announcement. He says, this is the first time he'd ever sat down with a black man and had a drink. And I was naive. I wasn't sure where this was going. Why, how is that possible? I sat down with thousands of people, all from any race, and I asked him why. I had to prod him, and then finally he says, "I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan." And at first I did not believe him. But it turned out that he was a member. He pulled out his card, handed it to me, and I stopped laughing. But we struck up a relationship. He was fascinated how a black guy could play what he thought was white music. And I was fascinated as to how he never sat down and talked to a black guy. So that's how it started.
I'm going to show our audience a couple of pictures here. Here's Chuck Berry, Daryl.
That's the man who invented rock and roll right there.
All right.
St. Louis.
You might recognize this ex-president, but back here, Daryl. What, from your music background, do you channel in order to talk to people who are KKK, white supremacists, racists? What are you using? What are you drawing on?
Well, everybody likes music, so that's a common ground. People may have different political beliefs or different, other kinds of leanings, but everybody likes music, so that's a common ground. But also, in musical terms, as a band leader on the stage, it's my job to take the different instruments, whether they're vocals or piano, saxophone, guitar, bass, drums, and blend them in harmony to have a good sound. So I just carry that job when I'm off stage as well. I try to blend people in society and get along.
Scott, I want you to honestly tell me that very first time that you came across Daryl and what you thought about him.
First time I came across Daryl, of course, first off, I had heard about Daryl, many years ago when I was inside the Klan. And I, be honest, I thought he was a nutcase.
What did you heard?
Well, I just, had studied and read the things he was doing, going around trying to talk to Klansmen, and I thought he was a nutcase.
Because?
Approaching Klansmen the way he did, because, there's some pretty dangerous people out there.
All right. And then?
And then, of course, I kind of ignored or didn't think about Daryl for a long time. And a few years later, I came across his Discovery Channel program. And I contacted Daryl after I saw that, and we struck up a conversation. And just like Daryl said, music played a big part in that, because I came from a town in Mississippi, Indianola, Mississippi, which is also the home of B.B. King. And that kind of gave us a conversation to have, and it did build from that.
So Scott, you of course have your own pretty fascinating backstory, and we have a couple of tweets on you all's relationship vis-a-vis how you were brought up. So this is a tweet from Sarah. She says, are people who are members of the KKK brought up at a young age to fear other races, or do they experience something to make them fearful? And I'll give a part two to that. This is another person who says, what was the common theme and the reason why people, or you in this case, joined the KKK?
Well, I think basically, of course, the reason I joined, and I think it's kind of pretty much has a common is a common denominator with other people that joined. And of course, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family, and you know, with an alcoholic father. But I must say, I take full responsibility for what I did and the bad decisions I made, and I'm not blaming anyone but myself. But there were some contributors there that, you know, sent me off in the wrong direction. I had low self-esteem. I didn't like myself. I didn't like anyone. I was looking for a place to belong and fit in. And of course, being from the area of the country in Mississippi where I was from, during those years, you know, there was, you know, the integration and the marches going on, and I fell right into, you know, that belief. You know, after I searched, you know, and I searched them out because I was looking for a place to belong. And they're not the only ones, you know. I had even checked out the Italian Mafia, but I was so naive, you know, I didn't know you had to be Italian to get into that organization.
He's like, what extreme group shall I pick?
Right, and then
KKK, they're accessible. Scott, I'm just wondering what qualities that Daryl has, because when we showed that little clip earlier of Frank the Imperial Wizard, it looks so bizarre to see the two of you sitting next to each other. What is it that Daryl does that makes KKK people even listen to him?
I think he's honest. I think basically it's his honesty, and it's a sincere desire to, you know, be friends with, even though the Klansmen, to be friends with him and sit down and get to know him.
Daryl, you spend a lot of time studying the KKK.
I have.
To the extent where you're actually teaching some KKK members about their own organization. Let me give you an example of this and show you a little clip of Daryl explaining one of the robes he has. Why does he have a robe? Well, Daryl will tell us in just a moment, but have a look.
This is a robe of an imperial wizard, the top guy. This is a white cotton robe with blue adornments, blue stripes, blue sash, and blue cape. And of course, you see the Klan emblem, the Mayoke. The red blood drop in the center signifies that they will shed their blood to preserve the white race. And if you look along the white cross, look at that black line right there, and then these two diagonal lines, they form a K. So you see 4 Ks, essentially, and that stands for Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
Who makes such a thing?
Sometimes the Klan members' wives make them. There was a Mennonite woman a couple hours from here who was making them for the Klan. They have a robe-making division up in Shelton, Connecticut.
Daryl, why do you have so much memorabilia in your house from the KKK?
I don't keep it all in my house. I keep most of it locked up on a site far away from my house. But I have that paraphernalia and memorabilia, regalia, because one day I'm going to open up a museum. And it's part of American history. You know, in any country, and America is no exception, we have the good, the bad, the ugly, and the shameful. And it's all part of our history, and no history should be destroyed. It should be preserved so people can learn from it.
You have, yeah, Malika, go ahead.
So we get this sense of, you know, people are watching this and Sambudan says, this sounds so idealistic, it won't work. Befriending them would imply approving their ideology, bad strategy. Now, of course, Femi mentioned the documentary at the top of the show, and one of the parts in the documentary it actually opens with, and I don't want to, spoiler alert, but just a slight, this might be a tease for people to go watch it. It opens with you explaining a phone call you had with a member of the KKK, and they needed a bus, and so you came in handy just at the right moment. Now, this person is asking, befriending them, and whether or not that just feeds into their ideology. What's your take on that?
No, you know, when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting. They may be yelling and screaming and beating their fists on the table, disagreeing, but at least they're talking, they're not fighting. And it's when the talking ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. And you know, if you spend 5 minutes, so you want to keep the conversation going, if you spend 5 minutes with your worst enemy, you will find something you have in common. And if you feed that commonality, you begin to build a relationship. If you feed that relationship, you begin to build a friendship. No matter how different you are, when you're sitting across from somebody like you and I are right now, and we find something in common, we're beginning to bond. You know, and we may disagree on certain things, but the more we find in common, the less things like this begin to matter. And when they give up their robes and hoods, they're done. That is their uniform. That is their badge of honor.
What does done mean?
Done,
Being
well,
out of the KKK, does that mean you're not a racist? What is done?
Done means they are done promoting racism and subscribing to that belief, because that blood drop that I just explained in that video on that cross means they will shed their blood for that belief. That's why it's called the blood drop emblem. Right? That's an oath that they take, and they have forsaken that oath. And when you give a black man, your nemesis, your top nemesis, your robe and hood, you are done.
I'm going to play some video from Charlottesville. This was from a couple of weeks ago in Virginia in the United States, where white supremacists, neo-Nazis went to Virginia. They clashed with protesters complaining about them being there. So I'm going to show you this. And then when you see that, what do you make of that?
I will tell you exactly, because I will tell you what the media won't.
Yeah. Go on.
First of all, the stated reason why they were there in Charlottesville was to preserve the Robert E. Lee statue. They wanted to protest the taking down of the statue. That's the official reason. That is not the reason at all they were there. And I can prove that to you. I'll give you a couple of points here. A, they were there because they wanted to start the first steps of a race war. It was all about hate. It had nothing to do with the statue. History will tell you, in this country, there were blacks and there were Jews who also fought on the side of the Confederacy during the Civil War. So whites, Jews, and blacks fought together in the Civil War to uphold the Confederacy. All right? Now, would it not add more weight to their cause to preserve the statue to have some blacks and some Jews also marching with them, saying, hey, that's our heritage too? Because there are blacks and Jewish descendants here today. In fact, I know some personally who have joined Confederate organizations, such as Sons of the Confederacy, who want to preserve the Confederacy because their great ancestors fought on that side. But no, these people excluded their black and Jewish counterparts, and they claim that they are the descendants of the Confederacy. And instead, what they did was they marched down the streets and through the UVA campus, shouting anti-Semitic and anti-black epithets. So it wasn't about the statue, it was about hate. That's number one.
When you see that, you see hate.
I see hate. And secondly, these people never knew their great ancestors who fought in the Confederacy, but they do know their fathers, their grandfathers, and possibly their great-grandfathers who fought in World War II against the Nazis. So you're going to honor your great ancestors and disgrace your closer-in ancestors by marching down the streets with people wearing swastikas, the same people our fathers and grandfathers fought against and possibly lost their lives against?
There are going to be people, and many people, and I've seen the critiques on your philosophy, and it's quite sharp in that you're spending so much time working with white racists and not enough time working with the African American community in the United States. And in the documentary Accidental Courtesy, there is a moment that is very tense, and this moment is when some activists from Black Lives Matter in Baltimore had a conversation with Daryl. Have a look at what happened.
Infiltrating the Klan ain't freeing your people.
I disagree with you.
I don't see how.
What about Timothy McVeigh?
He's in jail.
Oh, he is?
Or wasn't he killed? Something like that. So what?
Obviously, you're very uneducated about it.
Well, and you uneducated about the reality of most of the people that look like you.
Every day on the hour, young black men and women are being snatched and kidnapped off the streets. They're ruining people's lives, right? Not rehabilitating them and sending them right back in the same neighborhoods that are already screwed up anyway. So when you say, oh, well, we need to be worried about somebody blowing something up, no, somebody's getting locked up right now that's 16 years old, that's never may see the light of day again just because they look like my skin or Kwame's skin or your skin for that matter.
Of course, that exchange was interesting because it happened shortly after the death of Freddie Gray. This tweet I want to show here, this is just a little bit of news from the Associated Press, breaking as of a few minutes ago. The U.S. Justice Department won't charge 6 Baltimore officers involved in Freddie Gray's arrest and in custody death. And that's what led to the uprising, some would call it, to those protests you saw in the streets and to why those activists were there. So that moment, of course, has sparked a lot of conversation online. This is Rita. This is what she thinks of it. She says, I have zero respect for Daryl Davis. His exchange with Black Lives Matter was pathetic. What is dinner with the KKK going to do for my people? Just one more before I let you respond. Don't read the comment. Says, I'm not against Daryl's methods from an individual standpoint, but when Black Americans are tasked with changing the minds of bigots, that's a problem. So lots of criticism there. How do you respond to that?
I responded by saying, don't criticize someone until you've walked in their shoes. I've been to places they've never been to and possibly may never go to. You know, we spend too much time in echo chambers agreeing with one another. If you and Femi and I are all in agreement about racism and we form a group and we meet every other Wednesday to talk about how bad racism is, what are we accomplishing? We're accomplishing nothing until we invite, let's say if he was still a racist, until we invite him to our table to explain why he feels this way, what his fears are. We can explain to him why we feel the way we feel about his oppression and insulting us. That's how we resolve issues, by talking to the other party. And that's what a lot of those people don't do or won't do. That's what I do.
Scott, what's your take on that?
Well, he basically summed it up. You know, you sit down and talk with these people, and you find out you got some, a lot in common with them. You know, the background, I think, has a lot to do with it. You know, I came from a very racist society, and of course, I wasn't taught about racism by my parents or anything, but I got involved into that for personal reasons and personal problems. But I was raised by a black lady, and I always had a conflict with myself with that.
Sure.
Now he's living proof that it works, talking to people. He's here today because of that.
Daryl, you have a philosophy, and it's widely known. Anyone who knows you, you say, how can you
hate me when you don't even know me?
What's the answer you get back regularly?
Well, regularly, over a period of time, many of these people decide they can't hate me. And that's why they leave the organization. That's why Scott is out of the organization and many others.
I think it's something that Joey here might agree with. He's on Twitter. He sent us this just a few minutes ago. He says, well, if the oppressed won't do it, as in talk to people, who will? But he got a response from Sumaya, who writes in, you have a lot of strength to do this work, but it should not be the responsibility of the oppressed to educate the oppressor.
I disagree. It is the responsibility of all of us with any amount of knowledge to share that knowledge with those who do not have it. I'm tired of hearing, I'm not my brother's keeper. I am my brother's keeper. We all are brothers.
All right, let me share this with you from Anthony. Anthony says on Twitter, being a smooth-talking blues man, out-talking and out-behaving a club of grumpy simpletons and amateur geneticists, a good, strong method. If you're intrigued by Scott, if you're intrigued by Daryl, I recommend you look at this documentary, Accidental Courtesy, Daryl Davis, Race and America. It's available on iTunes and also Netflix. Daryl Davis, thanks for being with us. Play us out of the stream.